Hello everyone, in this video we're going to do a crash course on React or React for beginners, and we're going to start out with an API. I'm going to show you the entire code base in there in just a moment, and it's also going to be available in GitHub so you can pull that down as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by opening we have an API folder with a project inside it. We're going to create a new React project as a sibling of the API. So this is in my desktop and the React for Beginners folder. And so I have a terminal open with in the desktop folder in the React for Beginners. So in here, I'm going to run a node program called npx to create a React app. And if you need help, there's a video on installing Node Version Manager so you can get set up with Node so you can run this command. And that will be in the link in the description or in a playlist or something. So we're going to run npx create React-app, and I'm going to call this UI. And again, I ran this in the React for Beginners project. And so you should see it pop up here in just a moment. And there it is. So I'm going to let it run, and I will see you when it's done. Also, you may want to rename this something else. So when you pull the repository, there may be the UI folder already there. So you'll want to either rename it or delete it or move it out of the folder so you can use it as a reference, because I'd encourage you to write the code yourself and follow along with the video. Okay, React has completed installing the project in the UI folder. So if we look here, we should have this API and a UI. So I'm going to go ahead and open the entire thing in a text editor. And that will pull it open. And now we have our API and our UI. So we'll want to start each of these. So I'm going to go back to my terminal, and then in one of the terminal windows, we're going to go into the API folder. So cd API and npm start or npm run start. And we can see that because we have our package.json file with the start script. So that will turn on the server that we can call and make requests to. And then we're going to open up the UI folder. So I'm going to go cd UI into the UI, the React project, and then I'm going to run npm start in there as well. Okay, so it's finally turned on, and we have our Hello World application in React. And then if we look at our code in the UI folder, we'll want to figure out where this exists. So we go into our UI, our src, and then our index.js is where the root of the application is. But we've made it has an app, what is called a component. So this little structure here where there's the little caret and then the closing caret, it kind of looks like HTML. This is the app component. And so we import the app component from the app file over here, and then we can go look at this app file, and here is our functional app component. So it starts with, it's basically just a function with a capital letter, and then it returns like markup. So that is essentially the structure of the application. And then in index, we've got some low-level-ish stuff that isn't terribly important. You can always learn about that as necessary. But I'm going to get out of the index, and here is our code. So we have the class name with the app link, which is just some basic styling that React provides us, and then we've got our p tag. So edit src app.js and save to reload. Edit src app.js and save to reload. So there is our starting code base. And we're not going to talk much about CSS in regards to React, because I think most of the CSS stuff that you're going to be doing is going to be with, you know, something like Material UI or Tailwind or your own CSS library that you create. So I'm going to leave that for a separate like CSS video, but you can see how they've done it in a basic way with just this import app.css. It imports this app.css file. So that's as far as we'll go in regards to CSS. So the first thing I want to do is talk about state. And we can create components. So we're going to create a separate component for each example. So I'm going to clear out this header. And then the first thing I want to do is make my own component to talk about state. So what we're going to do is we're going to make function state example. And then basically it just looks like a function that returns some HTML stuff or markup. So with JSX inside of it if necessary. So anyway, inside this state example, we're going to do div, and I'm going to say I am the state example component, and then we can just use this component wherever we need to. And so I want to put this in the inside of this apps div here. So I'm going to do state example. And again, it looks just like HTML. This is JSX, and this is a self-closing component. There's another variety that you can do, and we'll show you that soon. But anyway, let's save this file. Prettier is going to reformat it for me. And again, you can check out a VS Code tutorial on learning how to do that. But if we go look at our new layout in the web browser, we'll see the code's been updated to just have this I am the state example component. So that is how components work. This is a functional component. There are class components, but they're getting more and more rare as time goes on because we're moving in the functional component direction. So anyway, we don't want to have our entire app in one folder or file. So what we may want to do is import this from another file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make inside this src folder, I'm going to make another folder called state, new folder, state, and then I'm going to make another file called state example.js. And so instead of having this component here, I'm going to cut it out, save, and put this in here. So function state example, and let's go ahead and save it. And so now if we look at our code, we get state example is not defined in app.js. And the reason is because we don't know where this state example came from. We have to import it, and we have to, because this app is not aware of this, so we have to import it. And so we import it from where it is in relation to this current file. So app is inside the state app, like the state example compared to app is in the state folder and then the state example folder. So we'll start from where app is at. So import, and then the app.js is a sibling of state, so we can just do /state and then state example. So /state example. And we actually want to import it with a name, so we want to call this component something. So I'm going to say import state example from the state folder's state example file. So if we save this and then refresh, we'll see export default was not found in state example. Module has no exports. Okay, so we need to actually export the file. So this is stuck inside of the state example. We need to be able to say, hey, this state example can be used in other places. And so we do that with an export. So export default state example. You can also, export however you want. There's a video on that. There should be a video on that as well. If not now, then soon. So export default state example. And now we get the the state example component, just like we had earlier. And because we're exporting it here, we're able to import it from other places. So now we can use it in our app.js. So let's start filling out this state example component. So we're going to talk about state here. And I'm going to try to make this a little easier to keep organized. So I'm just going to make an H1. Okay, and then I'm going to make an input tag or an input field. That way users can type in text into the field. Okay, so if we save this now, we should have an H1 that says demonstrating state, and then just a basic input field that user can type into. So I'm able to type into it, but we can't really interact with it beyond that at this point. And so that's where state comes into play. And you can think of state as the quote unquote state of the application. So think of yourself, like, what is your state right now? Are you hungry? Are you full? Are you injured? You know, that is the state, the current way that you exist, I guess. So that's the state of the app. And so we want to say, you know, there's this input field has, you know, the state of this ASDF text inside of it. So I want to be able to interact with that. So we're going to need to import React in order to do this. So I'm going to say import React, and then we're going to have this thing called a hook. It's called UseState, the UseState hook that we're going to use. And it comes from the React package. And so the way that we use this is at the top of the component. Before any conditional logic, you can set and use the state. So, you can set the state variable at least. So you can update it anywhere, but we'll get to that in a moment. So anyway, the way that we do this is we can create a variable or a const that state will reside in. So we're gonna let the user enter their name. So I'm gonna make the state called name. And we do that with const, and then we destructure these variables, however you wanna name them, from the use state. And we're able to destructure two, like a function and a variable. So the first part is the actual state, so we're going to call it name, and then the second piece is the function that sets the first piece. So we're going to call this set name, and then it comes from the use state hook. And then we have in the parentheses we can add a default value, and so I'm going to make a default value of an empty string. So I'm going to save that. And then now, we want to make sure this is state. Okay, so now we can use this state we can use this set name to set the variable. So the way this works is that we have, like with an input field, we want to know like what's the current value of the field. So the value is going to be equal to the name state. Okay, and then when a user enters input into this input field, we want to change the state to the new information. And so we have an onChange handler in the input that will listen and watch for changes. And this is like it watches for events. And so those events are stored in this parameter here. And so this is like this E stands for event. So you can do event or you can do E, but this basically watches for events on this input field. So when an event happens on this input field, we're going to change the state. So we change the state with this set name. So when there's an event, we're going to set the name to the new value. So this event has a .target.value, which records the value of the input field. So this looks like e.target.value. So if you save this, now we're able to set the state, and we're able to set the name state to whatever the user puts in to the input field. So if we type, we're now actually recording the state, but we're not doing anything with it yet. So let's open up the inspector, the console. I'm going to refresh, and now I want to console log the value of the name field. So I'm going to console.log name. And so now we can see the value of the name state changing over time. So if we refresh, we'll type some stuff in, and we can see that it's changing every single time you enter a value or remove a value from the input field. So now we have a way to interact with the user. So now that we have a basic understanding of state, we can actually print that state anywhere else in the application. So let's do a quick or a simple demonstration of that by just printing out the user's name underneath the field. So I'm going to make an h3 tag underneath the input field, and we're just going to say your name is, and we can use these curly braces to evaluate values or data from other parts of the app. So in this case, we're going to evaluate what is the name of state of what is the state of the name const. So I'm going to say name. So your name is name. So we're going to save that, and then let's take a look at our app. So your name is AAB. So let's try to put in Bob. Your name is Bob, and it changes. So this is state in a nutshell. So now that we have learned about state, you can actually do a bunch of really cool things with it. So the first example that you'll probably already seen is the counter in the React docs. So I'd suggest you try to make your own count state using what you learned. So go ahead and pause the video and give it a try, and we'll just do that real quick here in a second. So I hope you paused the video and tried it, but let's make some state for count. Okay, and it's as simple as this. So we have a button for increasing the count. When the user clicks the button, it will increase the count +1 to what it already is, and then the decrement will subtract 1 from what the current count is. And then we have another h3 that just says what the current count is. And then we also have the count and the set count state and a default value of 0. So if we save this and refresh, we get your name is, whatever you want to put, and then we can increase and decrease the count. And I do have some exercises that you should check out. One would be the ability to increase or decrease the increment and increment amount. So plus and minus would change the count by X, 2 or 2.5 or 20 or whatever you set. So you could have another state. So that would be one challenge. And then the other one would be to have the ability to be able to increase the count by a set amount and then decrease the amount by a different amount. So go ahead and give those a try on your own, and the solutions are in the GitHub repository, so you can check that out. But I do want to move on to expressions and a different way to print data. So you may have a function that returns or spits out some data. So I'm going to make an example function. So some function equals, and then it's just going to return out a random string. Okay, and so if you want to do some evaluations and then print out whatever gets returned from some function, then in the return statement of the function component, you can wrap the function with the curly braces to evaluate it. So now if we just run some function, we're actually calling this function which returns out this string. So this should work. I think we're going to need a BR. Okay, so if we refresh that, we get this I am a return value from a function. So that's kind of cool and is pretty useful at times. And then the next thing is we can have, just some data. So const some data equals. So now, once again, the curly brackets are useful here. So we'll just do some data, save, and we get this IAmSomeData. The other thing I want to do real quick is to show you like how to set up styling. So in our code editor, we're going to go to the div, the opening div tag, and we're going to add a style. And normally styles are just like strings. I'm actually not sure. I don't think this works. So I'm going to try that and see if that works. Okay, so this does not actually work, and I didn't think it did. But the way that you're supposed to do like attributes in React is to use the curly brackets. So you use one set of curly brackets, and then you use the others. So you basically use two sets of curly brackets. And it's going to be background, chartreuse for us. And so I think the first one is just to open up that like this is an expression, and then the second set is for the object, I think. I actually have never looked that up, so I don't know exactly, but I do know that you want two sets of curly brackets in order to set like information in attributes. So if we want to do like inline styles or whatever, then you would have it look like this. And so if we go back to our code, we see that we have a background color set up here. I wanted to talk about one more thing in this section, which is conditional rendering. So we have our code, and don't mind the other files. I've went back to this basic section and did something else off screen because I forgot about it. So let's talk about it. So conditional rendering is the ability to render a component under certain circumstances. So let's say we want a component to render only when, or we want one component to render when the count is below 5, and then another one to render when the count is equal to or above 5. So there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can, you could use a function and then just return a component conditionally in the function, or you could use a ternary, or you could use an and. So like, so the way this works is that we do a conditional check at the beginning. So if this evaluates to true, if the stuff before the and evaluates to true, then we can return this block of code, or this component, or whatever is after this, and. And then because this evaluates to false, this does not show up. So let's take a look at how this looks in the code. And we get, this block is true, so I show up, but the false one does not show up. And then another thing that we can do is use a ternary. So we're gonna make two components above 5 and below 5. So I'm gonna say okay, so we have these functions, and now we just need to put them into our return statement conditionally. Okay, so if the count is greater than or equal to 5, then return above 5, otherwise return below 5. So let's save this and see what this looks like. Oops, count is not defined. Change it to count. Okay, the content is below 5, so it's red, and then as soon as we go above 5, it becomes orange. And so this is conditional rendering and state. So the next thing we're going to talk about is props. So I'm going to close out the state example. I'm going to comment this out, and you can leave that imported. And so I'm going to import the props that we are going to create. And then we're going to use that component in our app component. And then now we need to create this folder and this component. So inside src, I'm going to name a props folder. And then we're going to make two components, dashboard.js and props example.js. And so then inside the props example, which is where is the component that we're importing, we're going to make this component. Okay, so I basically just wrote some very simple stuff that we already have covered. And then here's a comment that we are able to pass stuff into children or nested components, stuff like data, state functions, objects, etc. So let's just make sure that this works. So I'm going to go over here and we get name is, okay, and then we get the input type. An input field. So this component's working, it's getting pulled into the app. Let's make another component and we're going to put this inside of this props example component. We're going to put it down here. So I'm going to call this the dashboard component. So I'm going to say import dashboard. Okay, and then this dashboard component is right here, but we haven't created it, so let's create it now. Okay, so we have this dashboard component created. It's just some basic text right now, and we are exporting it, so that means we can import it from other components. So let's import it in the props example. We've actually already done that, we're just not using it. So let's put this dashboard component inside of our props example component at the bottom. There we go. Let's save and then see what we get. Okay, so we have our dashboard area that has a pink background. The message from the parent component is 3 bolded dots. And then we've got this little text input field that is in our props component. So this is in our props, and then after all of this HTML gets put into the page, then we have the dashboard component, and so we get all of its contents as well with a background of hot pink. So we can pass state down into nested props if you want to. So right now we have this state here, this input field, and let's test it out. So Bobby, that works. And what if this dashboard component needs the state of this name? Well, we can pass it in by adding a prop to the React component. And so what that looks like is this. Whatever the name of the property is that you want to add, you can add it in. It looks just like an attribute. So username equals, and then the curly braces, and then the value of username. So we want the value of username to be the state name. So we'll say name, and then let's also add another prop. So this is just going to be an example. So prop from parent equals hello, I like pie. So now if we save, now the dashboard component has access to a username, which is the actual value is the name in this component. And then this prop from parent is this hard-coded string. So because we've named these here, we can actually access them in the dashboard component. So let's go to our dashboard component and take a look. So here is where we would use the props passed into the dashboard component, but we need a way to get to them. And so you get to them in the parentheses. So it will give us the props. So we have the props available to us in this component, and so we could do something like console.log props in dashboard props. So let's save that, and then let's refresh and look. So we get props in dashboard, username of an empty string, and prop from parent, hello, I like pie. But we can change the value of username because it's set to the state and then the dashboard's parent component. So if I add something, we now get props in dashboard is Susie when the prop from parent stays the same. So now we can access that. So let's give that a try. All we need to do, this is an object, this props is an object, so we just need to grab the properties off of that object. So if we want the name of the user from the parent component, then we just do props.username. Oops, I think it's like that. So that's it. And then the message from the parent component is that prop from parent. So we just do props.prop from parent. So if we save and now we refresh, oops, and I actually need to use the expression or the curly brackets. So now I save, and now we get the message from the parent component is hello I like pie, which we can see that here in props example, we're passing hello I like pie into the prop from parent. So that's how that works. And then it also works with, the props.username as well. So that is basically props. And one thing to notice is that the component is only going to render or re-render when something changes. So I'll set up state real quick in the dashboard component, and then we'll see how that works. Okay, so I saved just some basic state and an input field. So we have a text field and it'll also log anytime the dashboard component gets re-rendered. So let's take a look at how this works. So in our app, we have this internal component or this internal field in our dashboard. And when we type in it, only the dashboard logs are happening. And that's because the parent component, this props example one, that holds the dashboard, this props example is not getting re-rendered because there's no changes to it. There's no need for it to re-render. Only the dashboard needs to be changed. But when a parent changes, all of its children are going to change. So if we change the state in the props example, then because dashboard is inside of props example, the dashboard is going to change or re-render along with the props example. So let's put a console log in props example, and we'll see that anytime we change the state in it, this is going to re-render and the dashboard component. So we'll try it out. So if I hit A, we get the props example and the dashboard rendering. But if I type in something in the dashboard area, then only the dashboard component re-renders. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing we're going to talk about is lifting state. And I'm going to pull open the text editor and we're going to close these out. And we're going to comment this one out. And then we're going to import the lift state. And it doesn't exist yet, so we need to make it, but let's go ahead and write this out. Okay, so we've imported it. Now we need to use the component in the app. Okay, and it doesn't exist yet, so we need to make the lifting state folder with the lift state ex component inside of it. And I'm just going to write some of the code out first, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so before I show you the code again, I'm going to just make sure that it works. So I'm going to refresh, and I've got this component up here, and then I've got the profile 2 area and the dashboard component. Okay, so everything seems to work. So all I really did was we created the lift state component, the lift state ex component. We put it in the app, and then we imported it. And then we have the lift state ex component here, in this function, with just some basic text, an input field, and some paragraphs. And then we're importing a profile 2 component and a dashboard 2 component. And so those are both in the same folder, which is this lifting state folder. And the dashboard 2 component is pretty bare. It's just a plain function with a return of basically an empty div. It just has an input type and an H1 and an H3 and a background color. And then we're exporting it, and without the parentheses, make sure that is taken care of. And then the profile2 component, which again is very simple. We just have a div with some text and a background color, and then we're exporting it. And then we're importing both of those into lift state, and we're using them one on top of each other. So what we have, the question is, let's say, so we have the profile2 component and the dashboard2 component are siblings of each other, and they are both within the lift state EX component. So we showed you passing props down. So we can pass props from lift state EX down to profile2, and I can pass data from lift state EX into dashboard2. But what if you need a piece of data from dashboard2 inside of profile2? How do we get data from in here up to where this dashboard came from, which is lift state EX? How do we get data to go from here into lift state and then into profile2? How do we do that? Well, the truth is that you kind of can't. That's why we lift state. So basically, if you look at the text, it kind of describes it. So if we have data that is needed in dashboard 2 and profile 2, then we would lift that state up to the component that both of these components share as a parent. So in this case, that would be lift state EX. So if we had data that we needed in dashboard 2 and we're adjusting in dashboard 2 and we need to get it into profile 2, then what we would do is we would lift the state up to this lift state EX function. So we're going to go back to our name example. So we're going to move the name state. Well, we never really set state, so you could have like a const name and set name in here. But if you need it in profile 2, we would take that state and we'd move it out of dashboard 2 and into the lift state EX. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and add some state into lift state EX. We'll say const name set name equals use state. So we have an empty state here, and then we can say something like the name is name, and then we can use this input field to change the state. So on change equals basically what we've already done. Okay, so let's make sure that works. Let's save that. Okay, that works. So now let's say we want to, do that what we were talking about, where we have data that we can change in dashboard 2, but it's accessible in profile 2. So if we're going to be changing the state in dashboard 2, then we need to not only pass the data, like the name, but we can also pass the function down into it as well. So I'm going to do that, and all we really have to do is just pass in the prop name, and you already know how the set name function works from the use state hook. We can pass that down into dashboard 2 as well. So I'm gonna name it the same exact thing as it already is named to keep it simple. So set name is equal to set name. So now we have access to the ability to edit and view the state in dashboard 2. So let's do that, or let's try to use that. So in our dashboard 2, we are going to pull out the props, and I did it like this last time, but we're just going to destructure now. So I'm going to pull out the name and the set name from the props, and then I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the name here in this H3. So we're going to print the current state, and then we're also going to use this input field here to change the value of the state. So I'm going to say on change equals Okay, and then the value is going to be value of the current state. So now I'm going to save this and we'll give it a try. So I've set the dashboard to have a background of yellow and the lift state to, I didn't set a background color for that. We'll make it brown. Okay, so we have the ability, we should have the ability, so the state is in this component here, this lift state EX component, but we should have the ability now to edit the state down here in this component. So I'm gonna say the name is Tim, and we can see that it's updated here in both components. And so let me try again, Tom. And so we can see we're able to edit it in both places now. So now we have our ability to update the state from in this component, and we can also view it in the profile too. All we need to do is pass it in to the profile too from the lifting state EX. So let's give that a try. So in our lift state EX, we have our state. So now all we need to do is pass it into profile too. So I'm just going to say name equals name, save, and then in the profile 2, we're going to use that state. And again, I'm going to destructure the prop value. So name, and then we're going to print the name here, name. So now we are able to update the state here and then view that same data in another component. We're able to, in a way, we're able to move the state from dashboard up into lift state and then back down into profile 2. Even though we're not really doing that, we're actually just keeping it in a shared common ancestor. So hopefully that makes sense. So let's test it out. And we can see our state is available in all 3 components. The next thing we're going to talk about is fragments. So I'm going to close out profile 2, all the stuff except the app.js. I'm going to comment this one out, and then we're going to import fragment example. That doesn't exist, so let's create it. Import fragment example. And so now we need to create this fragments folder and this fragment example.js file. So I'm going to make that in our src folder, fragments. Okay, and then let's just make this functional component real quick. Okay, so the only thing I really wanted to show you here was that you can't have 2 elements in the outermost return area. So if you wanted to do something like this, you can't do it. You would have to have everything wrapped in something in a single element. So you could do this, and if you don't want to use a div, then you can just use a fragment. So fragments look like this. They're just empty tags. And then I don't actually know why, but you can also import fragment from React. And then you can use fragment as well. So there we go. We'll have our code look like this. And this is basically fragments. I just updated the text here as a way to know what we're talking about in this example here. So I'm going to close this out, and now we're going to move on to children elements. So I'm going to comment this one out, and we're going to import and create the children elements example. So I'm going to say import children elements EX from the children elements folder. Okay, and then I'm going to put the component into the app. Okay. And now we need to create this folder and this component file inside of this folder. Okay, and then function children elements ex. And then in this example, we're going to try to create like a nav bar that is going to be part of like a layout. And so I'm actually going to make this be a sample like services page. So to signal that this is a service page, I'm just going to make a class name. So class name equals services page. Okay, and so we may have an about page and we may have a contact page and all of those things, and each of those pages should have a nav bar that is the same. And so we would like the website to have, you know, a shared layout. And so we can make our own layout component and we can wrap this children elements inside of a layout. So I'm going to make a new layout file. And then in here, we're going to make a component that doesn't close by itself, but instead it takes in other components in between the opening and closing layout tag. So it's notice here how some HTML, it's like image and then it's self-closing. And then there's other things where it's like HTML and then there's a closing tag, and you can put other components inside of it, like divs and spans. The same thing is available in React. So we're going to make a layout component, and it's going to take in a children prop, which is going to be all of the things that are wrapped in the layout. So everything in between the opening and closing is going to be the children, but then it's also going to be able to take in its own props, like a title prop or something like that. So the title and all the other props that you add are just going to be right next to the children. This is just kind of like a special prop. So we're going to do title and children. Okay, so we have this layout component completed. Now let's use it in the children elements example. And you can use this in as many components as you want. So anytime you want this nav here to be at the top of the page, then you would just wrap those components with this layout component. So we're going to do that in here. We're going to just say layout and then we just have to close. We just have to wrap the component. So we'll save this, and then now let's take a look. Okay, it says layout is not defined. Okay. And here we go. Now we have our entire children element is within the, our content here in the children elements is within the layout. So the layout component is all light green. And then I guess it would help if we made this, if we made the style a background, if we made the children elements have a background color and then a little bit of padding. That may help make it a little bit clearer. So the layout wraps the component. So hopefully that makes sense. This children prop here is equivalent to everything in between here, everything in between the opening and closing layout. So what happens is React sees this, sees the layout first, so it displays all of this stuff, and then it sees the children, so it displays this here, and then it ends the layout component here. So we'll end up with 25 pixels of the layout component underneath all of this stuff. So Again, hopefully that makes sense. And this is children elements and non-self-closing tags in React. Okay, so we're done with the children elements. Now let's talk about API calls. So we're going to close those out. I'm going to comment out the children elements, and we're going to make and import the API files. So I'm going to say import API call. Okay, now we need to create this folder and file. Okay, and we're going to need to we're going to need to install a new package called Axios, which helps us make fetch requests to an API or server or whatever. So we'll install this after we're done typing everything out. So with this code that we have here now, we're going to get an error unless you've installed Axios as a node module. So if we open up the browser, it says cannot resolve Axios, so we got to install it. So let's go back to our terminal, and we're going to close or kill the server or kill the UI and run npm install Axios. Okay, so we should be able to run npm start. And while this is loading, I'm going to hit right click and inspect, and then go to the DevTools. Okay, and so now we get a not found error because we're trying to hit localhost 3000 / undefined products, and that's because we have to set up our environment variable. And I don't think I've shown you the API yet, but the API code is just a products.json file. So it's got a simple array of products, and then the app.js file is this. You can learn more about Node in the Node.js video that I have, so be sure to check that out if you need help with that. But essentially this app is basically just setting cores to say, okay, we can accept requests from localhost 3000, and we're going to set the cores here. We're going to allow JSON and bodies of the request to be read by the server. And then we have our different endpoints. So we have products, which just returns all the products, the product ID, which returns a specific product based on the ID in the URL parameter. And then here we have a post request, which creates a new product. It pushes it to the array and then writes the JSON file to update the quote unquote database, which is just a JSON file at this point. And then we also return the ID and the title back to the client after creating a new product. And then we're listening on the server, which is going to be localhost, and the port, which is 3001. So that's pretty much all the app does, the app.js. Hopefully you've been able to see all that. So I'm going to close that out. And then we have, again, we have our products.json file. So now we need to set up our environment variable. So that's going to happen in the root of the UI project. So .env. And then we're going to add an API endpoint, and all React environment variables start with React_app and then the name. So ours is going to be API_endpoint, and we're going to set it equal to localhost 3001 and then a slash. So I'll hit enter and we'll save this, and then in our API we have access to this environment variable, React app API endpoint, and then it has a slash on it, and then we're hitting the products endpoint. So we'll get this here, which is going to just return all of our products. So let's kill the server because we added an environment variable, and then we'll restart it. So I'm going to Control C or Command C to kill it, and then npm start. Okay, so now when we look at the async response, we are getting an array and then an object with data, and the property of data is an array with our products inside. And the reason this works is because of Reactjs. So this file is basically it's a functional component that's just returning a div, and then behind the scenes, not stuff that we're rendering to the page, but in the function, we're calling this fetch data function, which attempts to use Reactjs to call the products endpoint on the server, and it awaits the response, and it will catch an error if there is one and just log out yeah. But otherwise, it waits for the response to finish and the server to respond to the client's request. And then it returns the response here in async response, which is where we get our data. So again, if you are not understanding this, then feel free to check out the Node.js tutorial. And so it seems like we're good, right? We have our data coming from the server, we have access to it in the client. So how do we get it into the actual UI so the user can see the data? Well, we just learned about state not too long ago, so you would think that we could do something like this. Okay, so we're importing UseState and React, and then we're making a state variable named data, and then we're trying to set the data to be the response from the server, our list of arrays. And then we try to log that data out, and from here we should be able to do something like this, data, but we can't because, data.title or whatever. But we can't because we'll learn why in just a second. So let's go to our UI and refresh. Okay, and so if you look at the logs, you can see that we have entered an infinite loop. It's not stopping. And the reason for this is because what's happening is the component gets mounted. It calls a fetch data, which is a request to the server. The server gets the data, responds, and then sets the data to the state in the app or in the API call component. So because this state is changed, this triggers the component to re-render and then call this fetch data again, which then when it gets its data back, it changes set data, and so we end up in an infinite loop. And so this is a big problem that we need something else to solve. And so we're going to learn about UseEffect and how we can use that to actually get our data into the UI. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. I'm going to comment all the state related stuff out. Okay, and then I'll leave that there for future reference. So let's make sure our UI works again. Okay, so we are back in business. Let's go back to the code. So I'm going to close this one out, and then we're going to learn about UseEffect. So this is the first example or section that I would consider like difficult. So do be patient with it and just do lots of exercises with it to try to get it down. So I'm going to import UseEffect example, which doesn't exist yet, from UseEffect example, UseEffect example. So be careful with the capitalization there. And then we're going to create this component. So UseEffect example. And then now we can create this folder and this file. Okay, so now let's create this component, and we're just going to take it one step at a time. Okay, so we've added some very basic UseEffect example code. We're not actually doing UseEffect yet, but let's just make sure that this code works. Okay, so we get UseEffect example is being rendered to the screen. So now let's try to get our fetch request that we did in the last tutorial up in this component also. Okay, so I think we did everything we needed to do. Let's, at least for this next step, so let's save and make sure we are getting a valid async response. So if we go to our editor, refresh, we're in our UseEffect example, we get a valid array of data, so we're good on this. Now let's see if we can figure out how to add it to the actual UI so the user can see the data. So in order to get the user to be able to see the data in the return statement or in the browser, we need to fetch the products inside of a UseEffect. So we actually don't need this useState quite yet. So I'm going to change this to UseEffect. So we're going to pull in the UseEffect hook, and we're going to learn about hooks more very soon. But we're going to pull in the UseEffect hook, which allows us to only re-render at like more specific times. It gives us more control over it. So let's actually just make a UseEffect and then we'll explain it. So we have a UseEffect hook with a function inside of it, and the second argument of the UseEffect is an empty array. So first parameter here, or first argument, is a function. Second argument of UseEffect is an empty array. After the first render of the page, the code inside the UseEffect function first parameter is going to be triggered and run. So the code inside of this function is going to run. So in this case, it's going to be our fetch products. Then on all subsequent re-renders, the UseEffect is going to be checked, but the code inside of the function is only going to run when something inside of the dependency array, this second parameter here, changes. So in order to get this UseEffect to run multiple times, you're going to have to change something inside of the dependency array or completely unmount the component and go back onto it. So you can unmount it by going to a place in the app where this component is not being used. And then if you go back to a place where this component is being used, then the component will be mounted and the UseEffect will be triggered. So we'll learn more about the nuances of this in a moment, but let's give it a try. So if we save this component and then refresh, we can see here that we have our async response and we have our data in the array of products. So everything is working at this point, and now we should be able to update the state. So let's give that a try. Okay, so we have updated the app to pull in the UseState hook. Then we create a products and a set products state variables or constants. And then we have, after the endpoint return, after the server returns a response, we're able to set the product state to the data received from the server. And then we console log the state of the products. And then we also have a default of an empty array for the state. So now we're printing out the data from the product's state instead of just the response from the server. So let's take a look at our code, refresh, and you can see at first we get an empty array, and then the server returns this response, it updates the state to the products that returned from the server, and now we get a single product in our array of products in the product state. So now we're able to use the product state in our UI to print out the products to show the user. So let's go give that a try. Okay, so I'm going to save this and then refresh. And so you'll notice that the first render, we get this, it looks like an empty array, so we get no products. But then once the server is finished, then it re-renders the page and we get our test product. And so a little pop quiz here is what happens if we put something inside of this dependency array? What happens if we put products inside of it? So go ahead and take a guess. I'm going to save. And then if we refresh, you'll see that we get an infinite loop. And the reason we get an infinite loop is because this UseEffect hook runs the code inside of the function when anything inside of this dependency array changes. So because what happens here now is the fetch products sets the state of the products to the data from the server. So this product state has changed, which means the dependency array, something in the dependency array has changed. So now UseEffect gets triggered again. So fetch products gets triggered again and changes the state, and therefore we end up in an infinite loop. So we want to make sure that this is empty. So I'm going to save it, and we'll go back to the working version. And we're good. So now let's try to do something like update the title in the browser to have the number of products that are displayed in the page. And this is a kind of a knockoff of the React counter tutorial in the UseEffect where they set the counter to the title. So it's very similar to this. So let's give this a try. So the first thing is we need to be able to add more products onto this list. So let's set up an input that collects user information and then updates the product list. So we'll add new products. So we're going to create an input type of text. Okay, so I have this form, but there's no state to handle the input field. So let's make a state. Okay, and now let's see if this works. So I'm going to save, go here, and we get our new product, and we're able to update the product. So that's good, but we need a way to add the product. So let's add a button. And because I want the user to be able to add multiple products without the page having to refresh, I want to reset the state of the input field when the user clicks on the button. So we're going to do multiple things, so that's why I'm going to just make a separate function here. So I'm going to call this add new product. So now we need to create this function. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set the products to what it already is plus the new product that was inputted by the user. Okay, and then, so this is going to be the first item in the array, and then afterwards, we're going to spread the rest of the products. I think it's a spread. Okay, so there we go. So this is going to make a new array with the new item at the beginning. And then after setting the products, we want to set the product input back to an empty string. So let's give this a try. Save, refresh, and then I'm going to say test1, add. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the ability to add new products to the list works, and it's only temporary because we're not actually sending this information back to the server and updating the array. This is all just in the browser. So the last thing I want to do with this exercise is actually get the content or the length of the array into the title. And so in the React docs, it talks about how the title update is an effect and it would go into UseEffect. So you would do something like document.title equals, whatever. And we may run into an issue when we try to do that with this current UseEffect. So let's just give it a try. So document.title is equal to the products.length products. So now let's give this a try. And so we're updating the products. So let's actually, okay, so we have the product state here being logged, and then we're updating the title. So let's give this a try and see how this works. So I'm going to go back to the app, refresh, and we get 0 products. And that's actually interesting, but let's just keep going. I'm going to add another item, and it's not working. It still says 0 products. And that's because this isn't being run when the products update. So the issue is that we can't, so every time the products update, we need to update this document.title. But we can't really do that because, as we learned earlier, this is going to cause an infinite loop. So if I hit save, refresh, and now we're stuck in an infinite loop again. So what do we do? Well, the answer is actually kind of simple. All we need is a second UseEffect. So let's make another UseEffect that will run when the products gets updated. So UseEffect, and then document.title, and you can do the update. And then in this situation, we're not going to have an empty array because we need to change we need to re-update the title anytime the products change. And so that would mean that we would put this products const in our dependency array. So products, there we go. So let's give this a try. I'm going to refresh, and we get 1 product. Okay, cool. So let's try to make an update. Hit add new product, and now we get 2 products. So that is UseEffect in a nutshell. The next thing we're going to talk about is React UseEffect Cleanup. And these UseEffect functions have cleanups, and we're going to do this in a separate component. So let's set that up. So I'm going to close everything out and then start in the app.js file. We're going to comment out UseEffect example, and we're going to make a cleanup file. So import from effect with cleanup file and the cleanup home component in this file. So let's set that up. So that was a lot to type, and you may have had some bugs in there that are hard to find. So feel free to clone or use the GitHub repository and just copy the files, or just look at what is already from GitHub. Whatever you got to do to make the code work. So I have a cleanup component here from the effect with cleanup folder and the cleanup home.js file. So effect with cleanup, we have this folder, and then inside we have cleanup home.js. And so this component has 2 sections. It has a yellow-green area with a div, or in a div, and it has a cyan area. And one of these is for a component that is broken, and the other one is for one that is not broken. So what we have is, let's look at the UI real quick. So here's the yellow-green area, here's the cyan area. And then we have text that says the component is not mounted or it is. So component is mounted, component is not mounted, component is mounted, component is not mounted. So each of these components can be mounted or unmounted. And then that means we have state that manages that. So cleanup mounted if you want to show it, and then the broken mounted can be shown or not shown. And so each one has its own separate state managed. So you could actually mount both of them at the same time. So inside of each of these divs, we have a button that toggles the state of either the broken or the working component. So this button here in the yellow-green is toggling the working component, and then this cayenne area is toggling whether the broken mounted is displaying or not displaying. So that's the setup of the app, and then we have conditional rendering for the text that says whether it's broken or whether it's mounted or not. So in this one, I do a function to return a component. So for the broken section, it's a function that returns conditionally the content. And then this one is just like a ternary operator. So that's the setup of this app. And none of that is new. So the new part is the UseEffect with cleanup and without cleanup. So if we look at the effect with cleanup, we are setting up, and both of them are very similar. No cleanup and with cleanup are very similar. So we have a UseEffect, and we are setting an interval. So we're setting a timer that will console log this text every 500 milliseconds. And so we're storing this interval ID into this myInterval. And then what happens is with this inside the UseEffect, we have a return block that returns a clear interval, which will stop the timer. And then we just have some text that just says, hey, this component here is mounted. And then in the no cleanup, we do the same exact thing, only we don't have a function inside UseEffect. And there's some text here that says that it's mounted. But in the UseEffect, there's no function that stops the timer. To clarify, it's the return in the UseEffect that allows you to properly unmount a component and clean up or stop or take care of anything that was turned on. So that is what the cleanup function is all about in this section. So let's play around with the code. So I'll refresh to start over. And so this component here, it does not have a cleanup in the cayenne section. So if we mount this component, meaning this component is now rendering on the page, this has no cleanup. So this timer is started and it's running. So every second or so, every 500 milliseconds, it console logs this text. But because we don't have a cleanup function, if we unmount it, we're not using that component anymore. But the timer was never stopped, so it keeps running. And now if we mount it again, now it's running twice as fast because we have two timers. And if we mount it again and again and again, now we have a problem. So this timer never stops running, and that's bad because when the component is not in use, you may want to stop that timer. So that's why we have the return statement. So in the effect with cleanup, we run this return. So when this component gets unmounted, we're able to stop anything that's already happening inside the UseEffect, or that was started by the UseEffect. So we don't have to. Not everything needs a cleanup, but in certain circumstances you do. So like with this timer, we need to stop the timer, if you want to stop the timer. So that's why you use a return statement. It can be named or unnamed. It doesn't matter as long as something is returned from the UseEffect. So in this case, we need to clear the interval to stop the timer. And so if we try this with the yellow-green component, we have our console log every 500 milliseconds, and then when we unmount the component, it stops. So that's what the effect with cleanup is all about. So now that we've talked about UseEffect, we can move on to the next step. And the next step is the form submission and learning about how hooks work. So I'm going to open up, or I have the app open up, our app opened up. So I'm going to comment out this cleanup home. So this is the first part, or the first section of the custom hooks part of this tutorial. And I wanted to make a more beginner-friendly version. So I'm actually doing this at the end, but I'm going to inject it into the middle. So don't worry about all this extra code. Just kind of follow along with what I'm about to type. So the first thing we're going to do is create a folder and a component with a component file with the basic hooks section. So I'm going to put this, I think it's right before the right after this cleanup home. So we're going to start here. Okay, so we're done writing the code. Before we look at the code, let's take a quick look at what's going to happen. So we have, if we refresh, we get a current count h3 tag with the 16 as the default. And then we can increase by 1 or decrease by 1, or we can set to a default, or we can set the state to 5. So what exactly is going on here? Basically, hooks are like functions with the word use in front of them at the very beginning, and then you are allowed to use other hooks inside of them. So in our example, we have, first of all, let's start at the app component. So we have this component named custom hook basics that's imported from the custom hooks folder. And inside of there's a custom hook basics.js file here. And so in here, we are importing a custom hook that allows us to adjust a count state. So we're importing this custom hook from the hooks file, and we pass in to use count the value of 16. And then we're pulling out some functions and state from the use count, and then we're using that in our custom hook basics.js file. So increment, decrement, and set to 5 are all functions, and then my count is a state variable. So what exactly is happening? Well, let's take a look at the use count. So we go to our hooks file, and here we are importing React. And then we're giving the function name use count, and we're passing in, we have the ability to pass in an optional state. So this will be the initial state, and if it's not passed in, it'll default to 4. But we passed in 16, so this initial state here is going to be 16 in our case. Then we go down here and we have a state variable. We've already covered state, so this is basically just state inside of a hook. So we're creating a count and a set count, and then we're setting the count to be 16 by default. And then down here we have an increment function which sets the count to whatever the count already is plus 1. Then decrements the count by 1, and then set to 5. Doesn't matter what the count is, it's just going to set the count to 5. And then we're returning the count state from use count, and we're returning the functions increment, decrement, and set to 5. And that's pretty much it. And so then we're exporting this use count hook, and then we're able to import it into our custom hooks component. And so basically we're able to manage state from outside of the component. And so if you want to reuse the counting ability, you can just import this use count hook from anywhere in your application, and you'll have this functionality available. And so this is pretty cool. It's just a nice way to clean up your code. And so, yeah, again, if you want to take another quick look at it, refresh, we get a default value of 16, and we're using the state functions from the use hook component. So that's a very simple demonstration of a custom hook. And now we're going to start learning about form submissions, and then we're eventually going to extract our logic that communicates with the server, and we're going to manage state and database calls and stuff within hooks in the next couple sections. And we're going to import or use a component called form submission ex, which again doesn't exist. So form submission ex, and then we need to import that file from wherever it comes from. We're going to choose that, and I'm going to choose it goes in this form submission folder / form submissions ex component. Okay, and now we need to create this folder and file. So in the src, I'm going to make a folder, form submission, with the file form submission ex.js. And the first thing we're going to do is just do a little import for React and Axios, and then create the basic component. Okay, so we have a basic form set up with a button that will trigger a function called new product, and this function is empty, and then we have state that will manage the user's input. So let's make sure this works real quick. Oops. And I'm gonna refresh and just type in some stuff. Okay, so it seems to work. We just need to set up the function to actually send the data to the database and update the JSON file, which is our fake database. So again, we have an API endpoint that will do this for us. I think it's called new product here. So it just does a very basic database update. So all we need to do is hit the endpoint new product with a rec.body with the title and color and all that. So let's set that up in our form submission, and we're going to do that in the new product because we're not just updating state, we have to trigger a call to the database. So we'll set this up, and this is going to be just like what we did in the other program, only it's going to be a post request instead. So let's set it up. Okay, so this might work. I think we might have missed something, but we set the new product function to have an async keyword in front of the function. That way we could await the post request and store it in async response. You could do the then, catch, and all that if you want, but I'm just gonna do it the async way. So let's refresh the page and then see if the data is actually going to be posted. So if I go to the database in the API or our products.json, I currently only have this test product. So I'm going to add something else. I'm just going to say cup, add new product, and then it says new product list ID 2 and title of cup has been returned. So let's go to the database, and we see that our cup has been added just with some dummy data for everything else except the title and the ID. But our product database is being updated, so that's really good. So we have this front end communicating and updating data in the back end, so that's good. The next step is how do we get this data to be visible in the UI. So in order to do this, the first thing, well, not the first thing we need, but one of the things that we'll need to do is map the products array onto the UI. Okay, so we have products.map, and this is not going to work until we set some state. So let's set some state for the products array. So I'm going to say const products and set products to set and update the products. And we're going to start with an empty array. So this should work because we'll have an empty array being mapped. We won't have any products, but it should work. Okay, so that's good. And then the next thing is to try setting the product's state to the products from the database. So we're actually setting here, because we're not getting the products list yet, so it's going to start out empty even if we already have stuff in the database. So we need to actually have two calls to the database, one to get the existing ones and then one for the adding the new ones. So we'll do that in a sec, but what we have right now is an empty set of products, and then when we add a new one, we want to add that new one to the list of products, so which would be our state. So in our try catch block, when we get the new products, we want to set the product state in the try catch. So we can do that with, well, let's set a new product list. So we'll say const new product list equals an array of the existing products, and then we're going to add another one, the new product, at the end of the array. So async response.data is our new product, and then here's our existing products, which is currently just empty. And so that's how we're going to update the state. And then we can set the new products, or set the products state with set products to the new product list. So I'll say set products new product list. And then we'll save, and let's try to do this. So I'm going to refresh and say car add. Okay, and let's say carrier will add. Okay, so it does seem to work, but we're just not getting the products from the database at the beginning, so we're ending up with an incomplete list. So instead of doing a regular old form submission like we've been doing with Axios, what I'd like to do is talk about hooks. So we're going to create a hook to query the database for us. So let's go to our code and we'll make a hook file, and then we'll pull this hook from the hooks file. So we're going to make our own thing that's like use state. So this is a hook, we're going to make our own. So let's do this. We'll write this code. Okay, so I know that was a lot. Let's go to the code editor and see if it worked. So I'm going to refresh. And it does look like we get the products back. So data in form submission EX, we are getting the products here in the data, and then in the form, we should be able to still add a new product. So let's talk about what's happening in the code. So the first thing is in the form submission, we created an import. So we imported this useGetProduct function from the hooks file. So we added a hooks.js file in our form submission folder. And then we also set up a pulling out of the useGetProducts. We pulled out these items here, data, loading, and error. So, and then we console logged the data from useGetProducts. So I think that's all we did in this file. So let's see what is in useGetProducts. So this is in our hooks file. So we go over here to hooks. We have the function body, and then we're exporting this function so we can pull it into the other file. We're importing Axios and useState and useEffect. And so here in this useGetProducts function, we have 3 sets of state, and then we're logging the data, And then after this function loads, well, so the first thing it does is it returns empty. It returns data, which is null by default, and then loading, which is true by default, and then error, which is an empty string by default. So the first time around, we're passing these values, these default values, back into the form submission folder. And so we're storing those here in these constants. So back in our hooks file, we have a UseEffect. So after the whole page is loaded, oh, and also, oh, I don't have the if is loading yet. Okay, so the first time around, it just returns this empty stuff. And then after everything's loaded, this UseEffect function gets triggered, and then we try to fetch the products, and we store it in this fetch products constant. So in here, we try to get the products from the server, and then when we're also awaiting, so when the data comes back, we set the state from in our UseEffect. We set any errors if there is one, we set the data if that gets returned, and then we set the loading to false because the request is complete, so it's no longer loading. And then if there's an error, we set the error. And then, so this is the definition of the function, then we immediately call it, and then there's no dependencies. So this is only gonna run once when the component gets mounted. So this state all gets set, which re-renders the component, and then, or this function, and then this information now has the error and the data and false in it. So then we return it again, and then it comes back to form submission, and then we have our data, and then we log the data. And so now if we see here in the dev tools, we get the array of data. So that's how this hook works. And so the next step is to solve the issue of the data still not being set to this product state. So in here, we're still not getting our default list of products. So we need to set the products to the state from the data. And so my initial thought was we could just set the data into this default use state. So by default, products is the result of calling data. And so I'm actually a little iffy on why this doesn't work, but I'll explain what I think. So that we would also need an empty array in the case of data being null. So that should fix that. But this still doesn't work because what's going to happen is that data gets set to null on the first time around because the data hasn't came back yet, and then products gets set to this empty array. And so once everything's been set, the default values aren't changed unless we call set products or set the state. So the defaults aren't going to change on re-renders unless we use the set state function, so set products, for example. So I think that's why this isn't working. So anyway, we're going to go back to setting this as an empty array. And then what we need to do is we need to use the UseEffect inside of this component to set the products. So I'm going to say set products data, and then we'll start out with an empty dependency array. So let's save this and refresh, and we get cannot read properties of null. I think that might be because maybe we need to set this as potentially an empty array. So let's save this and retry. Okay, there we go. And let's console log products. So console.log products, save. Okay, and so we do get the that was interesting. Why is this not working? Okay, so the reason this doesn't work is because what happens is the whole app or this whole component renders when data and products are an empty array and data is null. And so after that whole render, UseEffect gets triggered when the data and products are empty. So data gets set to the set products when it's empty, which causes set products to be an empty array. And just like we discussed briefly earlier, once the component render runs, it's only going to change the values when we call set products. So what happens is the UseEffect doesn't get run again because there's an empty dependency array. So when products change, the set products isn't going to get run to update the products because their products isn't a dependency of this UseEffect. So the solution is to add products to the dependency array. Now when products changes, it will rerun this UseEffect function and set the products to the data with the actual array items in it. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to save, refresh, and now we get our items. And so I think we do have one more problem. So let's try to add another item. Hit add new, and it doesn't stay with us. So the reason it's not staying, like the updates aren't staying with us, is because our UseEffect hook is always setting the products to the data. And the data is only called once, or these useGetProducts, once it retrieves the data from it, it's not going to update the data object, it's going to be updating the products object. You would have to get a new data object, you'd have to refresh the whole page. So the issue with this can be solved by only running this set products on the data once, and then let the set products here, when we're creating a new product, take care of the product state here. So we're creating a new list with the current products, and then we're setting the new product at the end. And then we're setting the state here, and this gets called every time you add a new product. So we can let the state be managed by this after the UseEffect sets the initial products. So we can do that with an if conditional. So I'll just say something like if products.length is greater than 0, then we can just, I don't know, do a console log or something. Okay, so now, oh, and then else, then we'll set the products. So if the products.length is not greater than 0, then we know that we need to set the initial array. So this should hopefully work. Let's save this. There might be some, edge case bugs, like with the, an empty list of products. I don't know, I haven't tested it, but we're just learning here at this point. So now this works. Now let's try to add a new object or new product. All right, there we go. So we have a hook working that gets the products, and we'd like to be able to set another hook to create the products. So we can reuse this create product like in multiple places if we want. It's just nice to clean up the code. So anyway, let's do that in another form submission project. I'm going to close out some of this stuff. Okay, and then I'm going to make a form submission 2. Okay, so I think we have a basic setup where our app should work, and basically we have the form submission ex2 component imported or used in the app component, and then we've imported that as form submission ex2 from the form submission 2 folder in the form submission ex2 file. So over here in our src, we have form submission 2 and then form submission ex2.js with this code in here. And then we have an empty hooks 2 that we haven't filled out yet. And so this should work. Let's refresh the page. We have form submit version 2 and we have the state working, but it's not going to do anything yet. So let's go to the next step. So we'll get as close as we can to where we were in the last project. So let's fill out the use get products hook so we can retrieve the existing products from the database. Okay, so I think we're good here. I think we're able to retrieve the data from the database. Let's do a double check. So I'm going to save this and save the hooks2 file. So we have our hook. We are pulling from the database. So let's see if this works. And then we're setting the data to this, returning the data to this data object in the form submission 2, and then we're console logging the data. So let's see. So refresh, and we get data in use get products. And I think it was just what, data? Yeah, so data on line 9, data on line 9. Okay, so we are getting the products back, so now we need to set them to the state. Okay, so I set the products to the product state to the return value of the data object, and I set that as a dependency. So anytime the data changes, the UseEffect gets triggered and sets the product. So let's see. If I refresh, we are getting the products, so that's good. The next step is to give the user the ability to create a product. And so again, we're going to use a hook this time. So let's make a hook for product creation. So in our hooks2, we're going to create another hook. Okay, so what we have here is our hook for use create product, which has a state of the product result. So like when we submit a product, we set the product result to the response. So if the post request was successful, then we set the new product that we just added to the new product result state. And then we return that product result out from the hook into the component that is using this hook. And then we also make a create product function, and then we return that out from the hook as well. So now if we want to create a product, we just have to call create product. And again, we've exported it here, so we're able to use this create product function and pass in a single parameter of the title of the product. So then we use that over here. We import the create product from use create product, and we on submission, so when the user clicks the button, we call this submit new product function here, which calls the create product function with the title, which is the current state of the input form. So we're basically calling this function with the input field that the user has entered in. So if we run this code, it should create a new product, but it's not going to update the state yet. So let's go here, and we're going to try to add a product. So I'm going to say boat, add new product, and we get in the network tab, we do get a post request. So, but no update here. So if we refresh the page, we get boat. So this is working, we just need to update the state now. And so when a new product is finished being created, here in this hook, in the await, or after the await, we set the new product result to the data. So we should have this new product result that we can use to set the new product. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a little iffy on the best way to do this. And it doesn't matter because almost everybody uses a library to handle this kind of stuff. So we're not actually going to be creating our hooks ourselves like this most of the time. So we'll learn that in a moment. But anyway, let's just continue on. So for me, what I decided to do was I said, if there's a new product result, then we can set the products to the new array. So the first thing is we'll put the new product result at the top of the array, and then we'll put the rest of the products underneath. So let's try this, and then let's also just set the title to an empty string so we can clear the form. And then let's also just do like an if loading. So if loading, return loading. We may want to put this up higher. Okay, so let's save this and then hopefully this will work. So let's go to our app, refresh, and I'm going to say Ferrari. I don't know if I spelled that right. Okay, and what happened? So we ended up with a too many re-renders issue, and the reason that this happened is basically in an infinite loop. So something is changing, which is causing the page to refresh, and then it refreshes again. So if we look at the code, we have this line here, or this section here, which is what broke it. So we have this new product result. If this new product result exists, then we set the products, which re-renders the page, and then the page continues rendering. As soon as we get to this if new product result, this new product result is still set. So it will set the products again. So we actually need to set the new product result to null, or some sort of falsy value. So I'm going to say set new product result to null. And this is another cool thing about hooks, is that you'll notice that this useCreateProduct sent us back a function which allows us to change the state in this useCreateProduct, because this hooks2 has its own state here. So we can actually set the state over here from in this form submission ex2. So that's kind of neat. But anyway, we set the new product result to null, so this will be falsy, and this will only run when the new product is actually like brand new. So let's save this. Let's try again. So refresh, and let's add a new thing. I'll say Toyota. Add a new product, and we get Toyota. And then let's do it again. Add new product. Okay, so we are good. And then what's also kind of neat is when we refresh the page, the new products actually get pushed down at the bottom. So the next thing we're going to talk about is using a library to handle that stuff for us. So we're still going to make our own hooks, but it's going to be a lot easier because we're going to be using a library. There's a couple different options, and I've always used React Query. So I haven't actually experimented with the other ones. I will probably do that soon, but we're going to use React Query. So I'm going to make a new project folder for React Query. Okay, and I kind of spaced out a little bit when I was typing. We don't need this quite yet, and then because I didn't have the products, it imported this use get products, which we don't need, so I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so we have a basic setup, and we have an input field that manages the state. The add product doesn't do anything yet. We got our little header to tell you what the page is about. And then in our app.js, we have the React query stuff component being used in the app component. And we're importing that as React query stuff from the React query stuff / React query stuff. So here we have our folder, and then we have our component inside of that folder. So let's start talking about React query. So the first thing we'll want to do is install it. So I'm going to kill the server of the UI and do npm install React-query. And then we'll start the server back up. So I'll say npm start again. And then now we can start using React query. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a folder called utils. So new folder in the React query stuff folder. So utils, and then I'm going to make a hooks folder, hooks.js, in that utils folder. I mean hooks file if I said folder. So we got a hooks file, and now we're still going to be using Axios to make the request. And I think the easiest way is to just start by making a query with React query, and then we can explain it. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so you can see here that we are able to get all of our products from the database with the use query from React query. So let's take a look at everything that we did just a second ago. So the first thing is we have to use query client or React query's context. We haven't covered context yet, and I'm actually going to do that in a separate video. So I'll link to that at the end or in the website, or in the description. So be sure to check out the context video that I did. But essentially what we're doing here is, rather than like in the section where we did lifting state, there's a similar concept where we can kind of like box up state. So basically we're saying here, this query client provider is a wrapper, and then everything in between it. So in this case, our entire app, we are able to share the state from this provider. So we put all of the state in the provider, and then we allow every component inside of it to access that state and then manipulate that state if we have manipulate state functions inside this provider that we can give to these other components. So basically, just think of it as we're lifting state up to this query client provider, and then everything inside it can access the state. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, check out the actual context video and page to learn more about how context works. So anyway, we have our entire app wrapped in this so we can share state. And then in our React query stuff, we're using the products hook that we created. So we're pulling out data. We're pulling out the data. Let's start at the hooks instead. So I should start with why React query is helpful. And the main reason that it makes state management easier, and it also helps with cache management. So our previous form submission examples queried the database for everything. This can be slow with large and complicated data sets. So rather than query the database all the time, we can set up a cache on the front end and have immediate access to that cache. So that's the benefits of React query. So let's go ahead and talk about the code here. So this get products function basically just queries the server. It hits the endpoint of products and returns the data into this data object, and then we return the data out of this function. And then we have our use products hook, which is our own hook that we created. And this hook is essentially just calling the React query hook and then returning the data. And then we import our hook into whatever component we want to get the data from. So anyway, this use query hook is pretty interesting because we can see that it functions similarly to our previous hooks that we created, where we have like an isLoading_state. We have some more stuff like isFetching and refetch. So this refetch is the function that allows you to refetch the data from the database. And then we have our data and an isError. And so another unique thing about this useQuery function or hook is that we're able to pass data into it. And so I was just talking about the cache. And so we need a way to identify different pieces of the cache. So for example, say we have a query for the first 10 records. Well, that's a cached query. Next time we need it, we can just grab those 10 records from the cache by getting that section of the cache. And what happens if one of those items, like item number 4, gets the title updated? We have to update that cached list of 10 records to show the updated version of the updated product. Otherwise, the cached list will be out of date compared to the database. So like if item number 4 gets updated, then it'll be updated in the database, but we need to make sure it gets updated in the cache as well. And so in order to update the cache, we need a name for each piece of the cache. So if we're querying for all of the products, like we are here, we can name that cache or that cached like section of results. We will name that products. And so now we have a key to identify that piece of the cache. So anytime we need to update this query, or the results that this query returns, we'll need to update the cache by using this query key. So anyway, this is essentially naming this result set. So we're just naming this result set products. And then you can also do stuff like, if you're doing paginated data, you could say, okay, this is products page 1, this is products page 2, etc. And so you can do that by adding a variable in the query key as well. But we don't need to do that yet. So anyway, that is this query key. And then we're also passing in the function that we're going to run to get the data. So in this case, we're hitting the products endpoint on our server with this getProducts function. So we pass that in here. And then we have this retry1 and retry delay here. And I'm gonna pull over the documentation. And here we have this retry and retry delay. So retry delay, this function receives a retry attempt integer in the actual error and returns the delay to apply before the next attempt in milliseconds. So I believe this is where it retries this it retries this query if only if it fails. And then retry 1. So if true, failed queries will retry infinitely. If false, failed query will not retry by default. So I think this is the number of times that this query will be retried. Or not the number of times, but like whether or not it will continue to retry or not. And then, okay, so yeah, if it's set to a number, then it will try that number of times before giving up. So that is this useProducts hook. And then we're finally able to return the data from this hook back to our other component that was using this useProducts. So we get data and isLoading. Those are the two important ones. So we go back to our React query stuff and we get data and isLoading. So again, isLoading will be true by default until the data is returned. So while the component is loading the data, it's just going to return this loading component. And then finally, we destructure the data from useProducts and then we rename it to products. So now we have an array of products in this products array, or this products const. So then down here, we can say products.map all of the products, and then we can list all of our products. So now if we go back to our code and we refresh, we get all of our products. So next we can start talking about getting or being able to make a new product. So we're going to make a new hook in our hooks folder. And once again, we're going to make our own hook that calls a React query hook. But before that, we are going to make a call to the server, one of the server's endpoints. So let's make a new product function. Okay, let me just make sure this works real quick. Okay, so we are good to go with the mutation now. So let's take a look at what we did. So the first thing is we made our hook. So we made a new product function that makes a post request to our server on the new product endpoint with the body that gets passed into new product. And then we use this new product function in the use new product hook that we created. And in here, in our hook, we made the use of the use mutation, which is given to us by React query. So again, we have the same pattern where we make our own hook that uses the use mutation hook from React query. Very similar to this one, only instead of a use query, it's a use mutation because we're updating something. So anyway, we pass the function new product into the use mutation hook. And then on the success of running this function, then we do this code inside of this on success. And so we use this thing called the query client, which helps us manage the cache. And so I didn't want to get too far into cache management in React query because that's very specific to a library rather than just React itself. So I'll probably have to do another entire video on React query, which I'll get to eventually. But right now we're just going to do refetch queries. So basically what we're doing is we're refetching the query that has the key of products. And so again, we named this query here with the products. So we're basically refetching the list. And then down here, we're refetching the query for a specific product that has whatever ID that was passed in. So let's take a look at the actual code, because then we export this use new product hook, which has the use mutation inside of it. So now we're able to pull out some information from this use mutation. So in the query, we're extracting a bunch of objects, and then in the use mutation, we're just returning the whole use mutation. So we can extract information from this use mutation as well. So in this React query component here, we're actually not even going to extract anything out of the use new product hook. We're just going to say, okay, here's the mutation object, and we'll extract in a minute. But for right now, we just have this new product object. And if we look at the use mutation documentation, we have some information. So we can get data, we can get this mutate function. And if you look at this is basically a function that we call when we want to actually run the mutation. So let's go back to the code. And when we add a new product, which would be when the user clicks the button, then we can call this add product function, which then calls the mutate. And then we're able to pass in the title to the mutate function. So we pass this in to the mutate. And so over here, our new product takes in a parameter, just like how we have a parameter in this mutate. So we can actually console log the body. So let's just do that just to make sure that we're on the same, that we're looking at this correctly. So body, I'll just say in new product. Okay, so let's try it again. Oop, I'm going to refresh. Okay, so I'll hit add product. And then if we, oh wait, let's inspect, look at the dev tools. And we get body in new product. We get our title test1. So then we pass this body to the server. We get the data as a response. And then because this was a successful request to the server and the server responded with a success, then we get this on success. And then we have our data in here. So console log data in on success. Data in on success, we get the object that was returned. And then we also have an ID, so we're able to set a specific cached item just for this object. So we're saying that we now have a cache item of product with a specific ID of this ID. So that will help us keep our cache in sync. But again, I don't want to get too far into React query. Right now, we're just going to be refetching. And so anyway, I think that this will make more sense when we do the final thing, which is the specific product. So we're going to make a page to view a specific individual product. It will be a lot easier to learn about this once we've learned React Router. So that's what we're actually going to do now. We're going to take a quick break from all of that and learn React Router. Okay, so we wrote some code and we're pulling from the React Router DOM package that doesn't exist yet, so we need to install that into our project. So I'm gonna stop the server and run npm install react-router-dom. Okay, React Router DOM has been installed, so let's start the server up again. And then we were also missing the home component. So I made a route to home, but that doesn't exist yet. So let's make that. So rather than just making a separate page for each component, I'm a little lazy at this point. So I'm just going to do function home, a component here in the same page. So we're just going to say function home. Okay, so that should work. So let's visit the UI and see if it actually works. Okay, there we go. So basically what we have is routing that says when you've hit the slash route or the home route, then you want to see the home component. So this is the element that shows on this specific route. And so this component here is just this right here, with a background yellow, and this is the home page. And so the reason this works is because we are using React Router DOM, and in the index.js file, we have to, again, use this context thing that we haven't talked about yet. So we have context wrapped around the entire application. So routing from React Router DOM works throughout the entire app. And then we're importing it browser router as router. So then this is our component. And then in our app, so inside of the router component, the next step is to have routes. And so in our routing stuff component, we have this routes component. And then from in there, then we can set up all of the routes. So from like a structural point of view, it goes on the outermost layer, we have the router, then we have the routes, and then we can make our route components for each specific route. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing I'd like to talk about is child routes. So we can do this, and then we could have a products page as well. So we could do something like route path equals slash products, element equals products, and then we could have, then on the products route, we would see the products component. So let's make a products component. So I'm going to go new file, products.js. Okay, so we made a new products.js component in the same folder as React Router stuff. And then this is just a very simple products component that just says products component. We export it, and then we import it in our routing stuff folder. And then we set up a route to view this component on this route. So now we have two routes. So if we go here, we can see this is the home page, and then if we go to slash products, we can see the products component. And so we may want to have the ability to make a new route for all products and maybe an update product. So we can make child routes underneath this products route by wrapping all of the child routes in the parent of the products. So parent products, so you can think of this as like the parent route, and then you can have children routes underneath it or within it. So in order to do that, we would change this from a self-closing to, a non-self-closing component or a component with children. And then we would also get rid of this slash, and then in here we could make all of the product routes. And so temporarily we're going to get rid of this element equals products component. So we're going to get rid of that just for now. And then, we also need to get rid of this closing bracket. Okay, so now we're going to make our child routes inside of the products. And so right now I'm going to make two. I'm going to make an all component to show all of the products. We'll display this products component, and then we'll have an individual product as well. So I'm going to say route path equals all, and then element equals products. And then this one is going to be a self-closing route. And then we're going to make an individual product route for route path equals, and I'll say product, single product. And then element equals product, singular. And then this one will also be a self-closing route. And so we already have the products component, but we do need an individual product component. So I'm going to hit save. It's going to give an error until we fix that. So I'm just going to import from here. So import product. And now I need to create that product. And this is in a separate file, so let's do that. New file, product. Okay, so we are exporting this, and then we're importing it in the routing stuff component. And then for the path of products/product, we'll render the product component, and for the route of products/all, we'll render all of the products, or the products component. So let's take a look at this. So here we have nothing because we don't have anything set for the product's home component or the product's index route. So /all will show the products component, and then product will show the individual product. So we still have a problem with the product's home route or the default route, and that is that this doesn't show. So if we just had something like products, it's not going to do anything. So you can do a reroute. There's a couple different ways to solve this. And one of the things that I would recommend if you don't want a layout component, which is what we're going to talk about in a second, you can get rid of the path for the one that you want to show, and then you can just say index. So we'll hit index, and then now if we refresh, we get the products component because this one is the index route for this path. So this one will show by default. The downside of this is that you would lose your all. So if we do products /all, it's not going to work. So you could add a new route. You could add just another one that says, you could do like this. Path equals all. But I don't really see the point in that. So anyway, the next thing is the layout component. But I do want to keep the index route as an example. So we're going to make one more component. We're going to call it products home. And then we're going to make this component up here. Okay, and then we're going to make the all path again. Okay, so now we should have 3 different routes working. So let's test it out. So the products all will show the products component. The products product will show the individual product, and then you could have some sort of special home page for the products route if you wanted. So this is a component that gets rendered on all index route of the products. That gets rendered on, yeah. So that is how child components work. You can also set up a layout. So for most websites, you will have like a navigation bar up at the top of the page. I'm going to close these out. You have a navigation bar at the top of a page, and no matter where you go on the website, the navigation bar will be available. That way you can easily, navigate the page. So if you want to do something like that where multiple components share the same layout, well, you can do that with the home or with the parent component. So let's take a look at how that works. Okay, so what we did here is we made a new component called products layout, and then we put it in the parent route. So this route has a non-self-closing, it's a non-self-closing component, so it has children in it. And so what we do here is we say, okay, this parent route of products is going to have an element products layout. And then we can use this outlet component here to display the children. So here so when we're on our products home route, then the outlet is going to be replaced by the products home component. And then when we're on the all, then this outlet will represent the products component. And then when we're on product, it will represent product. So we get to have all 3 of these children routes and the components share the same layout of whatever is in the parent. So that's how that works. And then make sure we add the outlet up here if you haven't already. So I'm going to save and refresh. And so now we can see that we have a shared view or a shared layout on all of those components, but not on the home component. So if we go to products, we get this, and then we get all and product all share the same layout. We can also reroute anything that doesn't exist to whatever you want to do. So at the end of the routes, we're just going to make another component that's like a catch-all, or another route that's like a catch-all. So we'll do something like this. Okay, so when you save this, this star is basically just catching all, and then it just says navigate to the home route. And then this replace will replace the route that was entered with the current route in the history. So React Router has like a history management tool, and you can track, like your route throughout the application. And so if you hit an invalid route, you don't want to go to an invalid route. So we replace a non-existent one with the existent one, if that makes sense. Because this will happen when a user tries to hit an invalid route. So we're basically just saying don't bother to keep track of the history of an invalid route. And this isn't going to work until we actually import this navigate. So routes, route, outlet, and we need navigate as well. So I'm going to save that. And then now we can refresh. And here we go. So now let's try to hit something that's not valid. Hit enter, it reroutes us back to the home page. So that's kind of neat. So let's actually set up our nav bar. So we have this products layout, but we don't have any useful navigation in it. So under this H2, we're going to add some href tags basically, but they're React router specific href tags. And these are within the link component, which we haven't imported yet, but we will in a sec. Okay, so I imported the link as well, and now we're able to use this link here in the nav, or anywhere really, so it becomes a clickable link routing tool. So if we go to our page, and, so it's not going to show up on the home page because this is nav specific to the products layout, so we'll have to go to the products route. Okay, so once we hit the products route, then here are these links, and you can see that they automatically know where to go just by the slash and then the route that you want to go to. So we'll try products home and then all products. And so we can see that this routing is handled for us with the link tag. Now let's get the individual products to work. So usually when you click on like a product, you can view a page specific to that product. So we'll set that up. And this is going to be, if we're doing products, then it would make sense for it to go in the products section of the site. So let's make another route in there. And when you're viewing a product, you have to have some other information, like the ID of the product, to know which one to display. So we use things called like parameters. And so let's look at how that works. Okay, so I've changed the product route to have a colon at the beginning, and then I've changed it to product ID. So now we can access this product route, but it's not going to be product/product anymore. It's going to be /products/ID. And so the ID is going to be like a unique identifier for that specific product. So let's try it out now. We'll go to products/4. We'll hit enter, and it does work, but there's nothing special about this page. So we actually need to do something else to get the specific product information into the product component. So in our product component, we want to use this thing called useParams, or it's a hook. And so we're going to use this useParams hook to get the specific information from the URL parameter. So that's going to look like this. Okay, so let's just start with this for now. I'm going to refresh, and we see the parameter is product ID : 4. And so this product ID is product ID because that's what we've named the first parameter. So well, because you can have multiple. So let's go back to the routing stuff. So you could, if you wanted to, make a complicated, so you could have multiple parameters in the URL if you wanted. And I encourage you to play around with that. But I'm not going to bother with it because the gist of it's in this here. But anyway, so we have this product ID that gets found in useParams when there's a matching. So because it's products/product ID, then the products for is going to be the product ID parameter. So that's why we end up with product ID 4. Hopefully that makes sense. So this can be seen like ID, only this is like a placeholder. So hopefully, hopefully that makes sense. So we have the ability now to query the database based on this product ID. You can also pass and receive state via React Router. So I'll show you how that works right now. Okay, so we now have a little bit more code. We've added 2 routes, one for passing state and one for receiving state, each with their corresponding elements. So element passing state, element receiving state. We do need to import those. So import passing state, import receiving state. So we've imported those. And then the receiving or the passing state, let's do that one first. So the passing state, I actually am not using this yet, I apologize. So the passing state is basically just, what we've already learned. The only difference is that there's a link component that has a state prop. So this input corresponds to this state variable or const here. And so we can pass that to another route with this state prop. And then we can access it in the receiving state with this location, this use location hook. We can store the value of that into location, and then we can get location.state. So that will be the data that came from the previous component or from the previous route. So let's test it out. So in here, oh, you know what? And we don't have the passing or receiving state. So let's go to passing state. Okay, and then let's click the send state link. Oh, after we add some data. So yo, and we'll send state. The component has received the following state, yo. And then there's one more way to do this, and we have to learn about navigate in order to do it. So let's just do this real quick. So there's another way to navigate, which is this use navigate hook. And so I've already imported it here, and then we can uncomment this line, or you can type it out if you don't have it. But this navigate is a function that allows you to navigate without directly clicking. So this would be used for after an event. So say after you submit a form, or at the end of the clicking of a button, you want to navigate. So let's test this out without sending state. So I'm going to add 2 BRs, line breaks, and then we're going to add a button. Okay, so we have a navigate function that navigates to /receiving state. It doesn't do anything with state yet, so this is just a regular old navigate. So let's try it. So send state another way. If we click it, the component has received the following state, nothing. But you can see that that's a way to get back to a route, or to navigate to a different route on the page. But you can also do this with state. So you can do that by just adding an object at the end with the state property set. So we're going to set it to state, and then the input will now work to send state. The navigate way. So let's save this and try it. So ho, 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 and send state another way. The component has received the following state. So this is another way to send a state from one route to another. So I think at this point I've covered everything about React Router that I wanted to talk about. So I do want to just clean up the app a little bit. You can skip this little section and just, use the GitHub repository, because we're just going to get it to the final version. So I'm going to add another home layout and all that kind of stuff. So bear with me. Okay, so I added a posts component, which doesn't really teach us anything new. It's just kind of, a way to see how it works, or, just to get a feel for it. And then I added another home layout to the index page just to make it easier to get to these other routes here. And then I made the home component, the index element of the index route. And then I added another something / product ID just to kind of get more comfortable with the parameters usage. And then I think that's it. I also added this home layout component to help with the navigation throughout the entire site. And posts is not defined. Okay, so we need to import posts. I thought I did that, but okay. Import posts from posts. Okay, I must not have exported posts. Export default posts. Okay, so that should work. And now we got a much better looking page. So we have products, posts, home, passing state. So if we want to get the very home, we can click this, and we can see the products section with its own products nav. And then the posts, all posts go here, and then the ability to pass state. So we can send it, and then we can receive the state. So that's pretty much everything. There's a little bit more stuff that we're going to do with the React query. So we're going to get individual product pages. So that's what we're going to work on in just a second. And since we've already covered React query for the most part, we're going to breeze through most of it. We're going to talk briefly about the other get specific product hook, but for the most part, it's just review at this point. So the first thing we're going to do is get the individual product. So we're going to fill out this page. And in order to do this, we're going to need the hook that gets us the individual product. So let's actually go back to our React query stuff, our utils and our hooks file. We're just going to reuse this folder, or this file here. So let's make our use get product and our get product. So we have use products, new product, but we don't have a way to get an individual product. Let's set that up now. Okay, I think we are done. This is the code that I ended up with on the product. And then these are the two new functions, well, function and hook that we added to the React query stuff /utils/hooks.js file. And so we'll talk about this in a second, but let's go make sure that it works. So let's check the route, I forget. So routing stuff, we're looking for the specific product. So it would be products/product ID to get to the product route. And which IDs do we have? If we go to products.json, it looks like we have an ID of 4, so with a title of carrier. So let's use 4 in the products. I'll click products and then /4. Okay, so this is an individual product. You are looking at a carrier with an ID of 4. So we are getting the individual product component by using the routing in React router DOM. So let's try React, or with the item 5. You are looking at ASDFJ with an ID of 5. So this is good. And let's take a look at the flow of how this all works. So let's go back to our code and let's start at the product file. So basically what happens is we end up with the route, like with the URL parameter will give us the params, which would be like 4 or whatever. And then we can use this, we pass the parameter, so like the ID of the product, into this useGetProduct mutation. So, or this hook. So useGetProduct receives the product ID and returns the response of, or the return value of useGetProduct into useGetProduct object. So let's go to useGetProduct, and the parameter is the product ID here. So that is in our hooks. So useGetProduct takes an ID, which is the URL parameter, so like 4, for example. Then we pass in, then we call the useQuery from React query, and we try to get the information, so like the status, data is error, etc., out of useQuery. But when we call useQuery, we pass in the query key with the ID. So we're naming this query not just a product, but a product with an ID. So this will be in the cache. And again, we're not really going to talk too deeply about cache, but we're getting the product with the specific ID. And then the function that we use to get that is going to be this getProduct function. So this is this getProduct function here. And then we get the key and the object. So let's see what getProduct the object and the key is. So if we go to our code, the obj is undefined and the key is this query key with product and 5. So we get product and 5 in this query key because here's product and then here's our ID. So either 4 or 5 or whatever, whatever ID you're using at the time. So we have the value of the object, or the value of the ID of the item we're looking for in this getProduct. So we can extract that out of the key because it's the second element of the array of query key. On key, we extract the ID with key.queryKey and then the first element of that. And then we can pass that into our get request to the server. So we're getting the product with that specific ID and returning it out to data. Then we're returning the data from getProduct back into this useQuery. And so that's how we get the data from useQuery. And then we return this back to our main component, our product component. So all in all, we end up with this useGetProduct object here, which will eventually have the data of the item from the server with the title on it. And so then we can print out the title and the ID here in this product component. And so that's hopefully makes sense on why this works. Okay, and so I don't actually think, or I'm not sure if this obj is actually anything. I'll have to do more research on that, so I do apologize for that. But until then, or if there is a solution, I don't know. But if not, then you can always just pass in any information you need in this array, and it should be available that way. So hopefully that helps. And then I think we're good. I think we can start on the other components now. So we're done with the product component. Let's do the products component. Okay, so we have this products component now, which we're basically just using the same stuff that we learned in the React query section. So we're creating a new product, we're getting the existing products and storing it in the products. If everything's still loading, then we return the loading component. We've still got our add product here, and everything should be working, and then we're importing the stuff that we need. So like we're importing the hooks and the link from React Router and etc. So let's take a look at the page we have now. And if we go to all products, we get this background color and we get the state. So let's see if this is working. So I add product and we get hello 1 2 3. And this works because of the refetching of the queries in our hooks file. So if we go to the use new product hook, we can see that we're using this query client thing to refetch the products. So let's try to comment that out and then try it again. So I'm going to save and then go back and refresh, and I'm going to try to make another product. So I'm going to say cherries, add product, and cherries is not showing up, but it did work because if we hit refresh, then cherries shows up. So the reason, again, this didn't work is because the cache is out of sync with the database. So when we add a product, the database updates, but the cache does not. And so there's, like, I've got some commented code out here for like a variety of different things to make this work. So this was one option. So refetch the queries for the products query key. So this products query key represents this query up here, which gets us the list of products. So we can see that because it's named products here. So when we refetch this, we're essentially rerunning this code and updating the cache. So without this, it's not going to work, but this isn't the only option. You can do this, refetch queries with no parameter or no arguments passed in, and that just refetches everything. So that's another way to do it. Let's comment this out and save and give it a try. I'm going to say fancy glasses, add product, and it works because this refetch queries just refetches everything. So you can play around with the different commented code to see how each of these works. I think some of them don't work. But the last thing I want to do is just do a navigation. So I want to navigate to the new product after it gets created. So, oops, that imported the wrong thing, lowercase n. And we're going to navigate to the products/data.id at the end of the onSuccess. So we need to pull in navigate, and we can do that in the top of the use new product. So underneath or above the query client, we'll say let navigate equals use navigate, and then we got to make sure that this is imported. So use navigate is imported. My text editor did that for me. So I'm going to save it, and then now if we add the product, it's going to update, refresh, or it's going to navigate to the new product after it's been created. So refresh, say glass jar, add product, it navigates to glass jar with the correct ID after it's been updated. So that is pretty cool. And I think that's it for React Router and React Query. And to wrap this up, I'd like to just talk about the manual creating of elements. So we're going to comment out routing stuff, and we're going to make a, what happened? We're going to make a test create element component that's going to show us how to use React.createElement. So we're going to do test Okay, so let's just make sure this works real quick. We refresh and we get some code. So basically, when React is working behind the scenes, it will create elements for us with this React.createElement, and the structure looks like this. So let's just walk through it line by line. So in this test create element, we return a div, then we return a p tag like normal, and then we return this div1. So this div1 is stored, it's a variable. So we have div1, which is equal to React.createElement. So this create element thing creates a div with a style of the background of hot pink and a class name of my class. And then this specific div's children are these things in this array, one after the other. So the first child of this div is a paragraph tag, and then it's a span. And then after that, it's nav1. And so nav1 is also in a variable. So this is also a React.createElement, which is of a type nav. And this nav element has a style of background orange and a class of my class 2. And then this nav also has a paragraph tag, a span, and a paragraph tag as children. So we then evaluate nav1 here, and then finally we put a paragraph tag underneath the nav1, and then that's the end of this div1, and then we create a div with a background of yellow-green and some text. So if we look at the code, we get exactly what we just described. So app, we're creating the app the manual way, div my class with a background of hot pink. There should be a nav inside here. So p, span, then the nav with its class and style, and then we've got its paragraph, span, and p tag, and then the end of the nav, and then we get and another. And then finally, we get our div style background, yellow, green. So that is React.createElement, and it's not really that useful unless you're doing like WordPress development. So I haven't touched WordPress in a long time, but from what I remember, they use this lower level React.createElement, so it may be useful for that. And I guess it's just good to know, I guess. But that is createElement, the React.createElement. And I think that actually sums up the React for Beginners tutorial and course that I wanted to talk about. So I think this will give you a good, solid understanding of the fundamentals of React, and you should be able to build a lot of stuff using these building blocks. And there's one more thing that you should look at, which is React context. And so I've got a separate video for React context that you can check out on the website or in the description or somewhere. So check that out and have fun coding in React. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when we release new tutorials. Also be sure to like the video and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Lastly, check out the link or links in the description. We usually create a blog post to go with the tutorial, and we might have a newsletter or course or something to check out as well. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.